here at Columbia. I'm the chair of Qanun, which is the Middle East Law Student Association. And on behalf of all of the groups putting this together, I want to welcome you here tonight. It's a very important talk we have here, and I want to thank Professor Rashid Khalidi and Mr. Ratner at the outset for coming here to speak with us on this matter. I'm going to introduce them very briefly, give sort of a background, context, and let them take it away, and then we'll have some time at the end for a respectful dialogue. So, of late, the news cycle has rightfully been concentrating on Israeli operations in East Jerusalem, settlement activity in East Jerusalem. But statements by Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat, like the one he made on the BBC no more than 3 weeks ago, that he wholeheartedly does not accept, he said in quotes, wordings by the United States, the European Union, and the UN regarding the annexation of East Jerusalem should give us pause. It's not annexation, he said, it's reuniting. Reuniting, he said, from 2,000 years prior. This should give us pause regarding the policy in East Jerusalem, certainly, but also with regards to Greater Jerusalem, and more generally, with regard to Mayor Barkat's regard for the Palestinian residents of the city. This is best shown here in the case of the Mamilla Cemetery and the Simon Wiesenthal so-called Museum of Tolerance. Professor Khalidi is going to give a brief background on the history and the case, and Mr. Ratner will then talk more about the case. And I look forward to hearing their talks. A brief intro to Professor Khalidi. He's the Edward Said Professor of Arab Studies here at Columbia. He received his bachelor's from Yale and his doctorate in philosophy from Oxford in 1974. He's the current editor of the Journal of Palestine Studies and was the president of the Middle East Studies Association and an advisor to the Palestinian delegation to the Madrid and Washington Arab-Israeli peace negotiations. They would be here all night if I sat and told you all that he's authored. His most recent book is called The Sowing Crisis, American Dominance in the Cold War in the Middle East. I present to you Professor Rashid.
Thank you, thank you all for coming. I'm going to give you a little bit of historical background on the cemetery, the issue of the Mamilla Cemetery. If you had something handed out to you which gives you a picture of a small part of the cemetery. Unfortunately, both Michael Ratner, who's a very distinguished lawyer, and myself, who's been teaching for many years, are not technologically sophisticated. Were we technologically sophisticated, we would have a barrage of maps and photographs and so forth to show you sophisticated visuals. We do not, so you're just going to have to follow along with what we say. I hope it will be sufficient. Let me first talk about the cemetery itself. What is this cemetery that that these student organizations throughout Qanun and others have organized the whole event around? Mamilla Allah Cemetery, which is what is known as in Arabic, it's also known in Arabic as the Mamilla Cemetery, is the oldest Muslim cemetery in Jerusalem.
Louder, please. Louder, please.
I will do my best. It's the oldest Muslim cemetery in Jerusalem. It may be the oldest Muslim cemetery in Palestine. It is the site of the biblical Mamilla pool, and it may have been in use as a cemetery even before the Muslim era. According to some accounts, it is the site of mass graves in the Byzantine era. It is reputed, there's no evidence for this, but it is reputed to be the burial site of a number of companions of the Prophet, people who were in the army, the Muslim army that took Jerusalem in 638. This is not historically attested. The first historically attested graves in this cemetery, well attested, are of commanders and soldiers who fought in Saladin's army, which retook the city from the Crusaders in 1187. One of Saladin's senior advisors, someone who, according to the historical sources, was always with the Sultan, chose to be buried in 1189. and there are burials attested from the 12th century until the 20th century. Since then, many Sufi saints, many distinguished scholars, many pilgrims who came to Jerusalem and died there, many people who came to Jerusalem to study and passed away there, and others who asked to be buried there because burial in Jerusalem was supposed to bring you closer to the site of the Day of Judgment in Islamic law, as in, obviously, the Jewish and the Christian tradition. So many people wanted to be buried there. All of them were buried in this cemetery. It was in use until the 1940s. Under the Ottomans, its boundaries were fixed in the 1860s, and a wall was erected. There's something that's being distributed, which I believe has a photograph of the old, I don't know where it is. They're up here. You can pick them up later, and it has a picture of the cemetery. You can distinguish that the Ottoman era boundary, which was untouched until the 1960s. In fact, if you visit the American consulate on Agron Road today, you can see the southern boundary as it was fixed by the Ottomans in the 1860s. That side of it has not yet been touched. The British, who took control of Palestine during World War I and received the League of Nations mandate for the country, placed Mamilla under the General Waqf Authority, which was supervised by something called the Majlis Islamic Ala, the Supreme Muslim Council. Now, this was a council made up of religious dignitaries, Muslim religious dignitaries, and they supervised this waqf. I'll explain in a minute what a waqf is. In 1937, during the Great Palestinian Revolt of 36 to 39, the British dissolved this Supreme Muslim Council and appointed their own people to take over control of all Islamic sites in Palestine. The entire plot, which from certainly the Ottoman boundaries being established in the 1860s until the 1950s, was approximately 33 acres. The entire plot was registered in 1927 in the name of the Waqf Authority, in the name of this Islamic trust. Now, you may ask, what is a Waqf? A Waqf is an Islamic public endowment, which in Islamic law is held in perpetuity for the benefit of the entire Muslim community. There are two kinds of waqfs there. General waqfs, such as the cemetery, such as mosques, such as shrines. These are held in perpetuity for the entire community. And there are private waqfs, or waqf guri, which are established by families, also for the benefit of Muslims, but under different conditions. This was a public waqf, registered legally under the British mandate in the name of the Muslim authorities. In 1944, the British Magistracy authorities declared Mamilla an antiquities site. Now, this is the situation of the cemetery until 1948. Inviolate, continued use under the supervision of Muslim authorities. After 1948, with the establishment of the State of Israel, everything changed. Certainly in terms of control of Mamilla, though it in fact was not actually touched for over a decade. Like other private property in Israel, which belonged to Arabs, like other public property, like other waqfs, general waqfs, this cemetery was placed under an entity called the Custodian of Absentee Property, an Israeli state agency, removing it for the first time in history from the control of Muslim religious authorities. The same thing happened to all waqf property in other parts of Israel. All cemeteries, all mosques, all public general waqfs were removed from the control of the religious authorities and put under the custodian of absentee property. Now, at the same time, a number of changes were taking place in the status of Jerusalem. Britain, having failed in its mandate, threw the issue over to the United Nations. The United Nations General Assembly, in November of 1947, voted for the partition of Palestine.